Victoria Hammond stood on the 60th floor observation deck of Hammond Tower, her slender fingers wrapped around a crystal champagne flute she hadn't sipped from. The Chicago skyline sprawled before her, a glittering tapestry of lights that usually filled her with a sense of accomplishment. Tonight, they seemed to mock her. To Hammond Enterprises' most profitable quarter in company history, announced Gerald Thornton, the silver-haired CFO, raising his glass to the small gathering of executives. And to Victoria, who has just secured the final approval for Westbrook Plaza, $2 billion that will transform this city. The executives, all men over 50 except for Victoria, clinked glasses and offered congratulations. Victoria managed a practiced smile, the same one that had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune at 42. She was one of the youngest CEOs of a Fortune 500 company, and certainly one of the few women. Hammond Enterprises, the real estate development giant her grandfather had founded and her parents had expanded, now rested squarely on her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying the precise blend of confidence and humility she had perfected over the years. But the real work begins now. As the conversation shifted to projected returns and construction timelines, Victoria drifted to the floor-to-ceiling windows. $2 billion, a number that would have made her father proud, a number that should have filled her with satisfaction. Instead, she felt nothing but a vast, echoing emptiness. 5 years ago, when her parents had died in the plane crash, Victoria had abandoned her life in Paris, her studio, her art, her freedom to take over the family empire. It had been the responsible thing to do, the expected thing, and Victoria Hammond always did what was expected of her. "The board meeting is set for 9 a.m. tomorrow to finalize the demolition schedule," said Sarah Chen, her chief of staff, appearing silently at her side, at 35. Sarah was Victoria's closest confidant, though even she knew only the public version of her boss. "The Westbrook Neighborhood Association has filed another petition, but legal says it won't delay us." Victoria nodded, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. "Which buildings are first on the demolition list?" "The old commercial block on Maple Street, including that outdated library," Sarah replied, checking her tablet. "Perfect timing, actually. The city's been looking to consolidate library services anyway. Most people use digital these days." Victoria's chest tightened inexplicably. The Westbrook Library? A faded memory surfaced, her father's large hand holding hers as they climbed the worn marble steps. The smell of old books, the way sunlight had streamed through the stained glass windows onto the reading tables. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked, noticing Victoria's sudden stillness. "Fine," Victoria said, setting down her untouched champagne. "I just need some air. Have my car brought around." 20 minutes later, Victoria's driver pulled away from the curb, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk outside her penthouse. She had sent him home despite his protests, insisting that she needed to walk. The bitter January wind cut through her cashmere coat. But she welcomed the sting. It was the first real thing she had felt all day. She walked without direction, her Italian leather boots crunching on the salt-strewn sidewalk. The exclusive Gold Coast neighborhood where she lived was quiet, the wealthy residents tucked away in their heated homes. Victoria walked faster, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air, trying to outpace the hollowness that had taken residence in her chest. Only when her cheeks were numb and her hands aching with cold did she realize where her feet had taken her. The Westbrook Library stood before her, its century-old limestone facade glowing softly in the streetlights. It wasn't grand or imposing like the buildings Hammond Enterprises created. It was worn, human-scaled, with wide steps that had been slightly concaved by generations of footsteps. Victoria climbed those steps slowly, as if in a dream. The library should have been closed at this hour, but light spilled from the windows. A small sign indicated extended winter hours, a warming center for the neighborhood during the cold snap. She hesitated at the heavy wooden doors, suddenly self-conscious in her designer coat and boots that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But the emptiness inside her propelled her forward. The warmth enveloped her as she stepped inside. Along with the distinctive scent of old books and furniture polish, the high ceilings, the wooden bookshelves, the reading tables scattered with studying students. It was exactly as she remembered from childhood, yet somehow smaller. Victoria unbuttoned her coat and moved deeper into the library, past the circulation desk where a librarian was helping an elderly man with thick glasses. No one paid her any attention. Here, she wasn't Victoria Hammond, CEO. She was just another visitor seeking shelter from the cold. She found herself drawn to the grand reading room at the back, where massive arched windows looked out onto a small courtyard garden. Now dormant under snow, Victoria chose a table near the window, away from the scattered patrons. She sat, removed her leather gloves, and simply breathed. For the first time in what felt like years, the constant hum of expectations and responsibilities quieted in her mind. She stared out at the falling snow, mesmerized by the patterns it made in the light from the window. "You look sad," Victoria startled at the small voice. A girl of about 7 stood beside her table, clutching a yellow crayon in her tiny fist. She had wild chestnut curls framing a heart-shaped face sprinkled with freckles, and her mismatched sweater and leggings were well worn but clean. "I... What?" Victoria said, caught completely off guard. "You look sad," the girl repeated matter-of-factly. "Yellow is a happy color. You can borrow it if you want." She extended the crayon, a simple offering held with the solemnity of a precious gift. Victoria stared at the crayon, then at the child, a strange emotion catching in her throat. When was the last time someone had offered her anything without wanting something in return? When was the last time anyone had simply seen her? "Emma." A man's voice called softly but urgently from across the room. Victoria looked up to see a tall, broad-shouldered man hurrying toward them, an expression of mortification on his face. He was strikingly handsome in an unconventional way, all sharp angles and the strong features, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn flannel shirt. His eyes, a deep emerald green, were fixed on the little girl, with a mixture of exasperation and endearment. "I am so sorry," he said, reaching them and placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Emma has a tendency to adopt people." "Don't apologize," Victoria said, surprising herself with the warmth in her voice. "It was the most honest thing anyone has said to me all day." The man's eyebrows rose slightly, and Victoria caught a flicker of surprise in his eyes, as if he'd expected a different reaction. The little girl, Emma, beamed up at Victoria. "My name is Emma. What's yours?" Victoria hesitated only briefly before answering. "Victoria," she said, looking from Emma back to the man, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable. "Liam," he offered, gesturing vaguely toward Emma. "And this is my little freelance philanthropist." Victoria's smile deepened, reaching her eyes for the first time that day. "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you both." She gently accepted the yellow crayon from Emma's outstretched hand, the waxy texture unfamiliar against her manicured fingers. "Thank you. I think I needed that." The moment hung in the air, a strange, quiet bubble in the middle of the bustling library. Liam shifted his weight, clearly unsure of the proper protocol for retrieving his daughter from a stranger's table. "I should let you get back to your work," he said finally, nodding toward Victoria's empty table. Victoria glanced down at the bare surface. "It's fine," she said, surprised by her reluctance to end the interaction. "I wasn't getting much done anyway." "She's very perceptive," Victoria added, looking at Emma, who was now digging through a small backpack she'd left at a nearby table. Liam nodded, a flash of pride mingling with something darker crossing his face. "Too perceptive sometimes. She sees things I wish she didn't have to." The words came out quietly, almost to himself, and Victoria felt them land like a physical weight. There was a story there, in his worn clothing, in the protective way he hovered near his daughter, in the shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. For a moment, Victoria saw him, really saw him, not as an interruption or a curiosity, but as a person carrying his own burdens, fighting his own battles. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement, a moment of unexpected connection. "Come on, Munchkin," Liam said to Emma, breaking the spell. Let's let the nice lady enjoy her peace and quiet. As they turned to leave, Victoria found herself watching them go, struck by a sudden, inexplicable desire to call them back. Instead, she looked down at the yellow crayon in her hand, rolling it between her fingers thoughtfully. On impulse, she reached into her purse and extracted a leather-bound notebook, a gift from her mother years ago that she'd never used. Opening to the first crisp page, Victoria pressed the crayon to the paper and began to draw a simple, childish sun in the corner. The waxy color was bright against the cream-colored paper, imperfect and vibrant in a way her controlled life was not. Victoria didn't notice the smile that had crept onto her face as she continued adding rays to her sun, nor did she notice how, across the room, Liam glanced back at her, his expression a complex mixture of curiosity and caution. Nathan Collins stared at the paltry contents of his refrigerator, half a carton of milk probably on the verge of spoiling, a few eggs, a withered apple, and some sandwich bread. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, calculating how long he could stretch these meager supplies. His last paycheck from the coffee shop had gone primarily to the heating bill, a necessity in the brutal Chicago January, leaving little for groceries. "Daddy," Emma's voice pulled him from his gloomy inventory. "Can we have hot chocolate tonight?" Nathan turned to find his daughter standing in the doorway of their small kitchen, her second-hand pajamas slightly too large, her wild curls haloed by the dim light from the living room. His heart constricted with the familiar mixture of love and worry that had become his constant companion since becoming a single father. "Not tonight, sweet pea," he said, forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. "But maybe we can get some at the library tomorrow after school." "Okay." Emma's face lit up at the mention of the library, their refuge, their sanctuary in the midst of Chicago's unforgiving winter. "Yes, and I can bring my drawing to show you. I'm making a castle with a moat made of stars." "That sounds amazing," Nathan said, genuinely smiling now as he closed the refrigerator. "How about some cinnamon toast for dinner, with extra cinnamon sugar on top?" "Yes, please." Emma bounced on her toes, her earlier disappointment forgotten, as Nathan set about making their simple meal. His gaze drifted to the small dining table where his architecture textbooks were stacked beside Emma's school folders. Beside them sat his grandfather's watch, a vintage Omega with a worn leather band that had kept perfect time for nearly 60 years. Tomorrow, he would take it to the pawn shop. The thought made his stomach clench. But the rent was due, and Emma needed new snow boots. Pride wasn't going to keep his daughter warm. Once upon a time, Nathan Collins had been on the fast track to success, a brilliant young architect with innovative ideas about sustainable urban housing. He had co-founded Collins and Reeves Design with his college roommate, James. They had secured several prestigious projects, and architectural magazines had begun featuring their work. Nathan had married his longtime girlfriend, Rebecca, and when Emma came along, their happiness had seemed complete. Then came the recession. Projects dried up. James, panicking about the firm's finances, had embezzled money from their clients. By the time Nathan discovered the fraud, it was too late. The firm was ruined, their reputation destroyed, and to complete the betrayal, Rebecca had left with James, deciding that a fresh start far away from the scandal was better than weathering the storm with Nathan. 3 years later, he was still picking up the pieces. The prestigious architectural firms wouldn't touch him, tainted as he was by association with the scandal. He had managed to find occasional drafting work and freelance design jobs, but nothing stable enough to rebuild his career. The coffee shop job paid the bills, barely, while he sent out portfolio after portfolio, hoping for a second chance that seemed increasingly unlikely. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" Emma said as they sat at the small table, munching on their cinnamon toast. "Always," Nathan replied, wiping a smudge of cinnamon from her cheek. "The lady at the library today, why did she look so sad? She had a pretty coat and fancy shoes. Rich people are supposed to be happy, right?" Nathan considered his daughter's question, once again surprised by her perceptiveness. The woman, Victoria, had indeed radiated a profound sadness beneath her polished exterior. It had caught him off guard. That moment of raw honesty when she'd admitted that Emma's observation was the most truthful thing she'd heard all day. Money doesn't always make people happy. He said carefully. Sometimes people who seem to have everything on the outside feel empty on the inside. Emma nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness she applied to all life's philosophical questions. That's why I gave her my yellow crayon. Yellow makes everything happier. Nathan smiled, reaching out to tuck a wild curl behind her ear. You have a good heart. Emma Collins. Do you think she'll use it? The crayon. I don't know, sweet pea. She seemed like a very busy lady. She'll use it, Emma declared with absolute certainty. I saw it in my dream last night. A sad lady needed a yellow crayon to remember how to draw the sun. Nathan shook his head slightly, used to his daughter's vivid imagination and her claims of prophetic dreams. Emma had always been this way, insisting she had dreamed of people before meeting them, describing places she'd never been with uncanny accuracy. He attributed it to her creative mind and the books she devoured at the library. Well, that was very kind of you to help her. Then, he said, gathering their plates. Now, time to brush those teeth. We've got another big day tomorrow. Later, after tucking Emma into bed and reading 3 chapters of The Secret Garden, her current favorite, Nathan sat at the small desk in the corner of the living room. He pulled out his sketchbook, flipping past technical drawings for freelance clients to a page where he'd been developing his own project. It was a design for a community library and arts center, a dream project he'd been tinkering with for years. His vision was a building that would serve as both a traditional library and a creative hub for the community, with studios for artists, workshops for children, and gathering spaces that could adapt to the neighborhood's needs. It would be sustainable, beautiful, and accessible, everything he believed architecture should be. The sketch was good. He knew that much. It showcased the talent that had once made him a rising star in Chicago's architectural scene. But it was also just a dream, a way to keep his creative spirit alive while he struggled to rebuild his life. Nathan sketched for another hour, losing himself in the clean lines and innovative spaces of his imaginary building. It was only when his eyes began to burn with fatigue that he reluctantly closed the book and prepared for bed. As he passed Emma's room, he paused at the door, watching his daughter's peaceful sleep. No matter how hard things got, he reminded himself, he had the one thing that mattered most. Emma was healthy, happy, and secure in her father's love. Everything else was just details. Still, as Nathan crawled into his own bed, the chill of the poorly insulated apartment seeping through his blankets, he couldn't help but wonder about the elegant woman from the library. There had been something in her eyes when she'd accepted Emma's crayon, a flicker of genuine emotion breaking through a carefully maintained facade. It had been intriguing. Nathan shook his head at the ridiculous thought. Women like Victoria, with their designer clothes and manicured hands, didn't exist in the same universe as struggling single fathers. Tomorrow, she would be back in her world of important meetings and expensive lunches, the yellow crayon forgotten in some drawer. He pushed the thought away and closed his eyes, willing sleep to come quickly. The morning would bring another day of the same challenges, making ends meet, keeping Emma's world stable and happy, and trying to hold on to the fading hope that his life might someday regain its footing. The next morning, Victoria woke before her alarm, something that hadn't happened in years. She lay in her king-size bed, staring up at the ceiling of her penthouse bedroom, trying to identify the unfamiliar sensation in her chest. It took her several moments to recognize it as anticipation. The leather-bound notebook sat on her nightstand, open to the page with the childish yellow sun. Victoria reached for it, running her fingers over the waxy drawing. A small, inexplicable smile tugged at her lips. Ridiculous, she murmured to herself, but the smile remained as she rose and began her morning routine. By 8:30 a.m., Victoria was seated at the head of the Hammond Enterprises conference table. Projections for the Westbrook Plaza development displayed on the screen behind her. The board members listened attentively as she outlined the demolition schedule and construction timeline. The first phase of demolition will begin next month, she explained, her voice professional and confident. We'll start with the commercial block on Maple Street, including the old library. Victoria faltered mid-sentence, an image of Emma's earnest face flashing in her mind. She cleared her throat. Including the old library, which the city has agreed is redundant given the new digital learning center planned for the north side. And the residential sections, asked Richard Blackwood, the oldest board member and her father's longtime friend. Those will follow in phases, Victoria continued, regaining her composure. We've satisfied all legal requirements for tenant relocation. The meeting proceeded smoothly, but Victoria found her thoughts continually drifting back to the Westbrook Library, to its worn marble steps and the scent of old books, to the little girl with the yellow crayon and her father's guarded green eyes. Victoria! Sarah's voice broke through her reverie. The meeting had ended, and the board members were filing out of the room. Sorry, what was that? Victoria asked, gathering her papers. I said legal needs your signature on the final demolition orders, Sarah repeated, her expression curious. Are you feeling all right? You seem distracted. I'm fine, Victoria said, accepting the folder Sarah handed her. Just finalizing some details in my head. Later that afternoon, Victoria found herself doing something unprecedented. She canceled her remaining meetings and left the office early, instructing her driver to take her to the Westbrook neighborhood. I want to walk through the site one more time, she explained when Sarah raised an eyebrow. Get a feel for the space before everything changes. In reality, Victoria had no intention of surveying the future construction site. Instead, she directed her driver to drop her 2 blocks from the library and walk the rest of the way, her heart beating with an unfamiliar rhythm. She paused on the steps, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing here? What did she expect to find before she could answer her own questions? Victoria pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the familiar warmth. The library was busier than it had been the previous night, students occupying most of the tables, elderly patrons browsing the newspaper section, a children's reading group gathered in a corner nook. Victoria scanned the grand reading room, trying to appear casual. But there was no sign of Emma or Liam. Disappointment washed over her, surprising in its intensity. Of course they weren't here. It was the middle of a weekday. The little girl would be in school, and her father would be at work. They had their own lives, their own routines that had nothing to do with her. Victoria wandered through the stacks, trailing her fingers along the spines of old books, trying to recapture the strange peace she had felt the night before. She found herself in the architecture section, pulling out a large volume on sustainable urban design. As she leafed through the glossy photographs of innovative buildings, she wondered if Liam might appreciate it. He had mentioned something about being an architect. Hadn't he, or had she imagined that detail? The lady from last night. The excited voice made Victoria turn so quickly she nearly dropped the book. Emma stood at the end of the aisle, her face lit with a delighted smile, her school backpack almost as big as she was slung over her shoulders. Emma, Victoria said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. Hello again. You came back, Emma exclaimed, as if Victoria had fulfilled some important promise. Did you use the yellow crayon? Did it help? Victoria smiled, charmed by the child's enthusiasm. I did. Actually, I drew a sun. I knew it. Emma bounced on her toes. That's exactly what I saw in my dream. Before Victoria could respond to this curious statement, Liam appeared around the corner, his expression shifting from concern to surprise when he saw Victoria. Oh, he said, stopping short. Hello again. Hello, Victoria replied, suddenly self-conscious about her tailored suit and pearl earrings that marked her as an outsider in this neighborhood. I was just browsing, Liam nodded, his eyes taking in the architecture book in her hands. Good choice, he said, a hint of genuine appreciation in his voice. Miyamoto's work is revolutionary. Victoria glanced down at the book, pleasantly surprised. You're familiar with his designs. I should be, Liam said with a small, self-deprecating smile. I wrote my master's thesis on his approach to community-integrated spaces. You're an architect, Victoria said, the pieces clicking into place. A shadow crossed Liam's face. Was, he corrected quietly. I'm between projects at the moment. Victoria recognized the careful phrasing, the pride that wouldn't allow him to admit to professional difficulties. She had seen it often enough in the business world, though usually masked behind expensive suits and confident handshakes. Daddy makes the best buildings, Emma interjected, oblivious to the undercurrents. He's designing a super special library with rooms that change and a garden on the roof where you can read under the stars. Liam's cheeks colored slightly. Emma exaggerates. It's just a pet project. I'd love to see it sometime, Victoria said, surprising both herself and Liam with the sincerity in her voice. There was a moment of awkward silence, broken when Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve. Do you want to sit with us? I have to do my homework. But then Daddy's going to help me draw a castle. You can use the yellow crayon again if you want. Victoria looked to Liam, expecting him to make an excuse, to shield his daughter from further interaction with a stranger. Instead, after a brief hesitation, he gave a small nod. You're welcome to join us, he said. If you don't have somewhere else to be. The invitation was tentative, leaving her an easy out. Victoria thought of her empty penthouse, of the stack of reports waiting for her review, of her standing Wednesday dinner reservation at Elliston's, where she ate alone at the same corner table each week. I'd like that, she said quietly. If you're sure I wouldn't be intruding. Liam's smile was small but genuine. Emma's already adopted you with the crayon ceremony. I'm afraid you're stuck with us now. Victoria followed them to a table in the corner of the reading room, where Emma immediately began unpacking her homework with the serious dedication of a scholar twice her age. Liam sat beside his daughter, his presence both protective and encouraging as she tackled her spelling worksheet. Victoria seated herself across from them, feeling strangely like an interloper in their well-established routine. Yet as the minutes passed, the initial awkwardness faded. She found herself helping Emma solve a particularly challenging math problem, while Liam looked on with an expression that mingled gratitude and something that might have been curiosity. You're good at fractions, Emma declared, impressed by Victoria's effortless explanation of how to divide a pizza fairly among different numbers of people. Math was always my best subject, Victoria admitted. Much better than art. Is that why you looked so sad when you were drawing? Emma asked, her piercing insight catching Victoria off guard again. Emma, Liam admonished gently. Remember what we said about personal questions? It's all right, Victoria said, finding that she didn't mind the child's directness. I was sad because I used to love drawing when I was about your age, but I haven't done it in a very long time. Why not? Emma pressed, ignoring her father's warning look. Victoria considered the question, unsure how to explain the complexities of adult compromises to a 7-year-old. Sometimes grown-ups get very busy with work and forget to do the things that make them happy. Emma frowned, clearly finding this explanation lacking. That's silly. Daddy works really hard, but he still draws with me every day. Liam cleared his throat, clearly embarrassed. Different kinds of work. I'm sure Victoria has important responsibilities. Victoria studied him across the table, his worn flannel shirt with fraying cuffs, his calloused hands that spoke of physical labor, the faint shadows under his eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. Yet here he was, patiently helping his daughter with homework, making time for creativity despite what were clearly significant challenges. Your dad is right about that, Victoria said to Emma, but he's also very wise to make time for drawing. Maybe I could learn something from both of you. Emma beamed at this, while Liam looked momentarily taken aback, as if unused to receiving compliments. The moment was interrupted by the buzzing of Victoria's phone. She glanced at the screen to see Sarah's name, along with 3 missed calls from the office. I'm sorry, she said, genuine regret in her voice. I need to take this. She stepped away from the table, answering the call with a quiet, Yes, Sarah. Victoria. Where are you? Sarah's voice was tight with stress. The investors from Tokyo are on the conference line. They're asking about the environmental impact reports for Westbrook Plaza, And I can't find the finalized documents in the system. Victoria closed her eyes, the real world intruding on what had felt like a momentary escape. Tell them I'll be on the call in 30 minutes. The reports are in the secure folder. I'll send you the access code. When she returned to the table, Emma was packing up her homework, and Liam was checking his watch with a poorly concealed expression of concern. You have to go, Victoria said, recognizing the signs. It wasn't a question. Liam nodded, a hint of apology in his eyes. Emma has a doctor's appointment, routine checkup, he added quickly, as if to reassure her. Of course, Victoria said, gathering her own belongings. I need to get back to the office anyway. As Emma stuffed the last of her papers into her backpack, Victoria impulsively reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. She hesitated, then held it out to Liam. If you ever want to continue our discussion about Miyamoto's work, she said, trying to keep her tone casual. Or if Emma would like more help with fractions. Liam accepted the card, his eyes widening slightly as he read it. Victoria Hammond, he said slowly. As in Hammond Enterprises. Victoria felt a flicker of unease. This was usually the moment when people's behavior toward her changed, becoming either obsequious or guarded. Yes, she admitted. That's me. Liam stared at the card for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The Real Estate Development Company, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, Victoria said again, suddenly wishing she hadn't been so impulsive. The easy camaraderie of the past hour seemed to evaporate. Liam pocketed the card with a nod that revealed nothing of his thoughts. We should go, Emma, he said, helping his daughter with her backpack. Thank you for the help with homework, he added to Victoria, his tone polite but distinctly cooler than before. Can Victoria come back tomorrow? Emma asked, apparently oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. Victoria is a very busy person. Liam said gently. She has important work to do. Victoria wanted to contradict him, to say that she would make time, but something in his guarded expression stopped her. Instead, she knelt to Emma's level. Thank you for letting me borrow your crayon, she said softly. It really did help. Emma threw her arms around Victoria's neck in a spontaneous hug that left her momentarily breathless. You can keep it, the little girl whispered. You still need it. Then they were gone, leaving Victoria standing alone amid the bookshelves, a strange hollow feeling expanding in her chest. That evening, as her driver took her home through Chicago's crowded streets, Victoria stared out at the city lights with unseeing eyes. The yellow crayon was in her purse, along with the leather-bound notebook containing her childish sun drawing. They felt like artifacts from another world, one where little girls offered simple kindness and their fathers spoke about architectural theory with quiet passion. Her phone buzzed again. Another email about the Westbrook Plaza development. Victoria ignored it, her mind replaying Liam's expression when he'd read her business card. There had been recognition there, and something else. Disappointment, wariness on impulse. Victoria pressed the intercom button. James, could you drive by the Westbrook neighborhood, the area around Maple Street? Of course, Miss Hammond, her driver responded smoothly, changing lanes to adjust their route. 20 minutes later, they were cruising slowly down Maple Street. Victoria rolled down her window despite the cold, taking in the neighborhood that existed in the shadow of her company's impending development. It wasn't affluent by any means, but neither was it the blighted area portrayed in the development proposals. Small businesses occupied the ground floors of old brick buildings, a family-owned grocery, a barber shop, a diner with steamy windows and a home cooking sign. Above them were apartments with warm lights glowing behind curtained windows. At the end of the block stood the library, its limestone facade illuminated by subtle ground lighting that highlighted its classic architecture. Stop here, please, Victoria instructed. The car pulled to the curb across from a small coffee shop called The Daily Grind. Through the window, Victoria could see a familiar figure moving behind the counter. Liam, wearing an apron, serving customers with the same quiet dignity he'd shown at the library. An architect working as a barista, the pieces of his careful phrasing, between projects, fell into place. Shall I wait? Ms. Hammond, James asked as Victoria continued to stare at the coffee shop. After a long moment, she rolled up her window. "No," she said softly. "Let's go home." Back in her penthouse, Victoria poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Looking out at the city, she was reshaping one development at a time. The Westbrook Plaza folder sat on her coffee table, filled with documents awaiting her final approval. She opened it, flipping through the glossy renderings of steel and glass towers, luxury condominiums, and high-end retail spaces that would replace the worn brick buildings of Maple Street. The projected profits were enormous, the potential for Hammond Enterprises' expansion unprecedented. Then she turned to the demolition schedule. The Westbrook Library was highlighted in red, one of the first structures to be razed. According to the report, the building had no significant historical or architectural value and stood on prime real estate currently being underutilized. Victoria closed the folder, her mind filled with contradictory images, Emma's bright smile as she offered the yellow crayon, the board members' satisfied nods as she presented the development plans, Liam in a barista's apron, her father's proud face when she'd agreed to take over the company. She picked up her phone, scrolling to Sarah's number, her finger hovering over the call button. One word from her, and the Westbrook development could be delayed, reconsidered, perhaps even redesigned to preserve certain elements of the neighborhood. But the consequences would be significant. The board was expecting this development to cement Hammond Enterprises' position as the dominant force in Chicago real estate. Investors had already committed based on the projected returns. Her father had always said that sentiment had no place in business decisions. Victoria set down the phone without calling. Instead, she reached for the leather-bound notebook and the yellow crayon. Opening to a fresh page, she began to draw, not a childish son this time, but the facade of the Westbrook Library, its columns and arched windows taking shape under her inexperienced hand. The drawing wasn't good. Years without practice had left her skills rusty and undeveloped. But as the yellow crayon moved across the paper, Victoria felt something inside her shift and settle, like a door long closed finally creaking open. When she finished, she studied the crude drawing with a critical eye. Then, beneath it, she wrote in careful letters, "Some things, once destroyed, cannot be rebuilt." Setting aside the notebook, Victoria picked up the Westbrook Plaza folder again, this time with a different perspective. Perhaps there was a third option, one that neither her father nor the board would have considered. It would require creativity, courage, and a willingness to challenge expectations. Victoria Hammond had always done what was expected of her, but as she stared at her childish drawing of the library, she began to wonder if perhaps it was time for that to change. The next morning, Victoria arrived at her office earlier than usual, a plan forming in her mind. She needed information, specific information that wasn't included in the sanitized reports her team had provided. "Sarah," she called as her chief of staff passed her open door. "I need the complete residential and business directory for the Westbrook neighborhood. Everyone who will be affected by the development." Sarah paused, surprise evident on her face. "The legal team already handled the notifications." "I know," Victoria interrupted, "but I want to see the actual list. Names, addresses, current occupations. Particularly for the Maple Street block." "May I ask why?" Sarah ventured cautiously. Victoria fixed her with a steady gaze. "Because I'm considering some adjustments to the plan, and I need all the information before making decisions." As Sarah hurried to comply, Victoria turned to her computer, opening a browser and typing "Liam Collins Architect Chicago" into the search bar. The results were immediate and illuminating. Articles from architectural magazines dating back 5 years highlighted the innovative work of Collins and Reeves Design, a boutique firm specializing in sustainable urban spaces. Photos showed a younger, more carefree Liam accepting awards, standing proudly beside completed projects. Then came the news stories. Chicago architectural firm under investigation for financial irregularities. Collins and Reeves Design declares bankruptcy amid fraud allegations. James Reeves pleads guilty to embezzlement. Partner claims no knowledge of scheme. Victoria read each article carefully, the picture becoming clearer with each one. Liam Collins hadn't been charged with any crime, but his professional reputation had been tarnished by association. The final article, dated 3 years ago, mentioned that he had been left with significant debt from the firm's collapse and that his wife had filed for divorce shortly after the scandal broke. The pieces fit together now: the worn clothes, the job at the coffee shop, the carefully maintained pride in the face of obvious financial struggles. Liam Collins was a talented architect whose career had been derailed by circumstances largely beyond his control, and now his neighborhood, perhaps even his home, was scheduled for demolition to make way for Hammond Enterprises' next profit center. Victoria sat back in her chair, a complex mixture of emotions churning inside her. She had never before considered the individual lives affected by her company's developments. The relocations and displacements were always handled by the legal team. Reduced to statistics and cost analyses in the reports she reviewed, Sarah returned with a thick folder. The Westbrook Directory, as requested. I've highlighted the Maple Street addresses. Victoria thanked her, then asked, the community library on Maple, what's the utilization rate? Sarah checked her tablet. According to the city's assessment, about 42% of capacity on average, but it spikes to nearly 90% during extreme weather events when they serve as a warming or cooling center. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. And the building itself, what's the actual structural assessment? Solid foundation. No major issues according to our engineers. It's just outdated, not optimal use of the space. Thank you, Sarah. That will be all for now, when her chief of staff had left. Victoria opened the Westbrook Directory, scanning the pages until she found Maple Street. There it was, Collins, Liam and Emma. Apartment 3B above the Daily Grind coffee shop, one of the first buildings scheduled for demolition. Victoria closed the folder, her decision crystallizing. She reached for her phone, dialing a number she rarely used personally. Marcus Victoria Hammond, I need you to delay filing the final demolition permits for Westbrook. Yes, I'm aware of the timeline. No, just a temporary hold. I'm considering some design modifications. 2 weeks should be sufficient. Thank you. After ending the call, Victoria sat quietly, considering her next move. What she was contemplating was unprecedented in Hammond Enterprises' history, a significant redesign at this late stage, potentially preserving structures that had been slated for removal, all because of a chance encounter with a little girl and her father. The board would resist. The investors would question her judgment. Her father would have called it sentimental foolishness. But as Victoria picked up the yellow crayon from her desk, rolling it between her fingers, she felt more certain than she had in years. For the first time since taking over Hammond Enterprises, she wasn't just following the established playbook, she was writing her own. That evening, Victoria returned to the Westbrook Library, this time with a purpose beyond the vague longing that had drawn her before. She carried a small gift bag containing a beautifully illustrated children's book about a girl who painted stars, a spontaneous purchase from the bookstore near her office. The library was bustling with after-school activity, children at the computer stations, teens studying in groups, adults browsing the shelves. Victoria scanned the room, looking for a wild mop of chestnut curls or the tall figure of Liam. She found them in the children's section. Emma sprawled on a colorful rug with a large picture book while Liam sat nearby, his attention divided between his daughter and a thick textbook open on his lap. Victoria approached slowly, suddenly nervous in a way board meetings and investor presentations never made her feel. Emma spotted her first, her face lighting up with unrestrained delight. "Victoria!" she exclaimed, scrambling to her feet. "You came back." Liam looked up, surprise evident on his face. He closed his book and stood as Victoria reached them, his expression guarded but not unwelcoming. "Hello again," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." The lie was transparent. Hammond Tower was nowhere near Westbrook, but neither Liam nor Emma called her on it. "I brought something for you." "Emma," Victoria continued, holding out the gift bag, "I saw it and thought of you." Emma accepted the bag with reverent hands, Her eyes wide, she pulled out the book, gasping with pleasure at the cover illustration of a girl surrounded by painted stars. "Daddy, look, it's just like my drawings." "What do we say, Em?" Liam prompted gently. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Emma bounced on her toes, clutching the book to her chest. "Can I go show Miss Pearson? She's the librarian who helps me find the best books." Liam nodded, and Emma dashed off toward the circulation desk, her excitement leaving a wake of smiles among the other library patrons. "That was very kind of you," Liam said when they were alone, his tone warm but still carrying a note of caution. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Victoria said softly. "But I wanted to." She paused, gathering her courage for what she'd come to say. "Mr. Collins." "Liam, please," he interjected. "Liam," she amended with a small smile. "I wanted to talk to you about your work. Your architectural work," she clarified when confusion crossed his face. His expression closed slightly. "As I mentioned, I'm between projects at the moment." "I know," Victoria said carefully. "I did some research. Collins and Reeves' design was doing incredible work before the difficulties." Liam's jaw tightened, a flash of pain in his eyes. "That was a lifetime ago." "Your talent doesn't disappear because of what your partner did," Victoria pressed gently. "The Sustainable Community Center in Pilsen, the artist residences in Humboldt Park, those were visionary designs." Liam studied her face, wariness giving way to curiosity. "Why are you interested in my past work?" Victoria took a deep breath. "Because Hammond Enterprises is considering a significant redesign of the Westbrook Plaza development, and I'm looking for an architect with experience in community-integrated spaces." Liam stared at her, clearly trying to process what she was saying. "Westbrook Plaza," he repeated slowly. "You mean the development that's going to demolish this library and half the neighborhood?" Victoria winced at his blunt assessment. "That was the original plan," she admitted, "but I'm exploring alternatives that would preserve certain elements of the neighborhood, including the library." Liam's expression shifted from surprise to suspicion. Why the sudden change of heart? Hammond Enterprises isn't exactly known for preservationist tendencies. "Let's just say I've gained a new perspective recently," Victoria said, her eyes drifting to where Emma was animatedly showing her new book to an elderly librarian. "Sometimes it takes a fresh pair of eyes to see what's truly valuable." Liam followed her gaze, understanding dawning on his face. "Emma," he said softly, "her crayon." Victoria nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "And her father, who makes time to draw with her despite everything." Liam was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her words against his understandable skepticism. "What exactly are you proposing?" he finally asked. "A consultation, to start," Victoria said, keeping her tone professional despite the flutter of nervous energy in her chest. "I'd like to see your vision for what this neighborhood could become. If preservation and development could work in harmony instead of opposition." "And if I say no," Liam challenged, though there was a spark of interest in his eyes that belied his cautious tone. "Then I'll find someone else," Victoria said honestly. "But they won't have your connection to this community or your proven talent for sustainable design." She held his gaze, allowing him to see the sincerity behind her offer. This wasn't charity or pity, it was recognition of genuine skill and an opportunity that could benefit them both. "I'll need to see the current plans," Liam said after a long moment. "The complete plans, not just the public relations version." Victoria felt a surge of hope. "Of course, I can have them sent to—" "And I'll need to talk to the neighborhood association," he continued. "Get their input. Any redesign has to reflect the community's needs, not just Hammond Enterprises' profit margins." "Agreed," Victoria said, impressed by his conditions. This wasn't a man looking for a handout or an easy path back to success. He was maintaining his principles, even when facing an opportunity that could change his fortunes. Emma bounded back to them, interrupting the moment. "Miss Pearson says it's the most beautiful book she's ever seen," she announced proudly. "And she says I can read it right now if I want. Can I?" "Daddy," Liam smiled down at his daughter, ruffling her curls affectionately. Of course. Munchkin, why don't you find a comfy spot while I finish talking with Miss Gurney Hammond? Victoria, Emma corrected seriously. She told us to call her Victoria. Fornham when Emma had settled with her new book in a child-sized armchair nearby. Liam turned back to Victoria. I'm not making any promises, he said quietly. If I don't believe in the project, I won't put my name on it. I wouldn't expect anything less, Victoria replied. Integrity is rare in our business. I respect it. She reached into her purse and extracted a business card, writing her personal cell number on the back. Call me when you're ready to discuss next steps. My assistant will send the plans to whatever email address you prefer. Liam accepted the card, studying it for a moment before tucking it into his pocket. One more condition, he said, his expression serious. No matter what happens with this consultation, the library stays non-negotiable. Victoria felt a smile spread across her face, a real one, not the practiced expression she wore in board meetings. Mr. Collins, I believe that's the first thing we've agreed on. As she turned to leave, Victoria felt lighter than she had in years. She had no idea if her impulsive plan would succeed, if the board would approve her changes, or if Liam's designs would be compatible with the economic realities of the development. But for the first time since inheriting her parents' company, she was following her instincts instead of the prescribed path. Just before reaching the library exit, Victoria glanced back. Emma was engrossed in her new book, while Liam had pulled out a sketchbook and was drawing something with rapid, confident strokes. Even from a distance, Victoria could see the passion and skill in his movements, the mark of an artist reconnecting with his craft. In that moment, she knew she had made the right decision, regardless of the business implications, because sometimes the most valuable things couldn't be measured in profit margins or quarterly reports. Sometimes they came in the form of a yellow crayon and the courage to draw outside the lines. The first snowfall of February transformed Chicago into a glistening wonderland, softening the city's hard edges with a blanket of pristine white. Inside her corner office on the 58th floor of Hammond Tower, Victoria watched the flakes spiral past her window, momentarily mesmerized by their lazy descent. The board members are arriving, Sarah announced, appearing in the doorway. They're not happy about the emergency meeting. Victoria turned from the window, straightening her charcoal suit jacket. They'll be less happy about what I'm going to tell them. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked, her voice lowered despite the empty hallway. In the 3 years they'd worked together, Victoria had never seen her chief of staff look so concerned. Redesigning Westbrook Plaza at this stage, the costs alone will be offset by the long-term benefits, Victoria finished firmly. I've run the numbers. Sarah, it's viable. What she didn't say was that viability wasn't her only consideration anymore. The thick folder on her desk contained Liam Collins' preliminary redesign for the Westbrook development, a brilliant fusion of preservation and progress that had kept her awake for 2 nights straight as she pored over the details. His vision maintained the historic facade of the library while modernizing the interior. It incorporated the existing small businesses into a pedestrian-friendly commercial district rather than replacing them with chain stores. Most importantly, it created affordable housing units alongside the luxury condominiums, ensuring that current residents like Liam and Emma wouldn't be forced out of their neighborhood. It was innovative, sustainable, and humane, everything Hammond Enterprises developments typically were not. Richard Blackwood is particularly agitated, Sarah warned as they walked toward the conference room. He's been calling other board members all morning, Victoria nodded. Unsurprised, Richard had been her father's closest advisor and remained the most powerful voice on the board. He was also the most resistant to change, viewing Victoria's leadership as a temporary caretaking role until she produced a male heir to continue the Hammond legacy. Let him be agitated, Victoria said, her voice cool and controlled. This is still my company. The conference room fell silent as Victoria entered, 7 pairs of eyes tracking her progress to the head of the table. Richard Blackwood sat to her immediate right, his silver hair immaculately styled, his expression a study in barely concealed disapproval. Thank you all for accommodating this last-minute meeting, Victoria began. nodding to Sarah to distribute the folders containing Liam's redesign. I've called you here to discuss some significant modifications to the Westbrook Plaza development. Modifications, Richard interrupted, not bothering to open his folder. Victoria, demolition is scheduled to begin in 3 weeks. The contractors have been paid. The permits are filed. The permits are on hold, Victoria corrected smoothly. And the contractors can be rescheduled. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Victoria pressed on, activating the presentation screen behind her. Liam's designs appeared. Elegant, detailed renderings that transformed the utilitarian development into something with soul and character. What you're looking at is a reimagining of Westbrook Plaza, she explained, her voice gaining strength as she outlined the vision that had captivated her. Instead of raising the neighborhood, we integrate its historic elements. Instead of displacing residents, we create a mixed-income development that serves both luxury clients and the existing community. This is absurd, Richard scoffed. Hammond Enterprises doesn't build low-income housing. We create premium properties for premium clients. Times change, Victoria countered. Sustainable, inclusive development is the future of urban planning. This redesign positions us at the forefront of that movement while maintaining our commitment to profitability. For the next 30 minutes, Victoria presented the financial projections, the marketing advantages, and the potential for positive press coverage. She had anticipated every objection, prepared counter-arguments for every criticism. Yet as the board members exchanged skeptical glances, she realized that logical arguments might not be enough. "Who designed this?" asked Janet Chen, the youngest board member and usually Victoria's most reliable ally. "It's not our usual architectural team." Victoria hesitated only briefly. "Liam Collins. He's a local architect with expertise in sustainable urban design." Richard's eyebrows shot up in recognition. "Collins from that bankrupted firm, the one involved in the embezzlement scandal. His partner was responsible for the financial irregularities," Victoria corrected, keeping her voice even. "Mr. Collins was cleared of all wrongdoing." "Still," Richard pressed, sensing weakness, "why hire a disgraced architect with no recent portfolio when we have relationships with the top firms in the country?" Victoria met his gaze directly. "Because his vision for Westbrook is exceptional, and because I believe in second chances." The room fell silent at this uncharacteristic sentiment. Victoria had always been known for her ruthless efficiency, her unsentimental business decisions, this apparent softening over a failed architect. No less was unprecedented. Richard leaned forward, his voice lowered as if sharing a confidence. "Victoria, your father built this company on clear principles. Sentiment has no place in business decisions. He would never have entertained such a radical departure from our established model." It was the argument Victoria had anticipated, and the one she had most dreaded. The invocation of her father's legacy was Richard's nuclear option, deployed whenever he needed to bring her to heel. This time, however, the expected wave of doubt didn't come. Instead, Victoria felt a surprising surge of clarity. "My father isn't here," she said quietly. "I am, and I believe this redesign represents the best future for Hammond Enterprises." Richard's face flushed with anger. "The board will never approve this." "Let's find out," Victoria replied, turning to the other members. "I call for a vote. Those in favor of proceeding with the redesigned Westbrook Plaza development." Janet Chen's hand rose immediately. After a moment's hesitation, 2 more hands followed. 3 votes, including Victoria's own. Not enough. Those opposed, Richard's hand shot up, along with those of his 2 closest allies. 3 opposing votes. All eyes turned to Walter Freeman, the oldest board member, who had remained silent throughout the presentation. His hand remained in his lap, his expression thoughtful. "Walter," Richard prompted impatiently. The elderly man studied Victoria for a long moment. "Your mother came to me once," he said finally, his voice gravelly with age. "Back when Hammond was just starting to become successful, she wanted to incorporate green spaces into the developments. Parks, community gardens. Your father said it was a waste of valuable real estate. Victoria listened, barely breathing. Her mother had never told her this story. Margaret believed that buildings should serve people, not just profit margins, Walter continued. She didn't win that argument, not then, but she never stopped believing it was the right path forward. Walter's gnarled hand rose slowly. I vote with Victoria, in Margaret's memory. 4-3. The redesign was approved. Richard stood abruptly, gathering his papers. This is a mistake you'll regret, he warned Victoria, his voice low and threatening. You're risking everything your family built. No, Victoria replied calmly. I'm building something new, after the board members had filed out. Sarah approached Victoria, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. That was unexpected. Victoria exhaled slowly, the tension of the confrontation leaving her body. Call Mr. Collins, she instructed. Tell him his design has been approved. I'd like to meet with him tomorrow to discuss next steps. As Sarah left to make the call, Victoria turned back to the window, watching the snow continue its silent descent over the city. For the first time in 5 years, she felt fully alive, not just a caretaker of her parents' legacy, but a creator of her own. Nathan adjusted his tie for the third time, scrutinizing his reflection in the small bathroom mirror. The suit, his only one, rescued from the back of his closet and hastily pressed, felt foreign after years of jeans and flannel. But today's meeting at Hammond Enterprises headquarters demanded his professional armor, threadbare though it might be. You look handsome. Daddy, Emma declared from the doorway, still in her pajamas, her wild curls even more chaotic from sleep. Nathan smiled at his daughter's reflection. Thanks, Munchkin, but I think I've forgotten how to tie this thing properly. Emma climbed onto the closed toilet seat for a better view, her small face serious as she studied his handiwork. It's crooked, she announced. Like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Pisa, Nathan corrected with a chuckle, making another attempt at the Windsor knot he'd once tied daily. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of activity unlike anything he'd experienced since the collapse of his firm. Victoria's request for a consultation had turned into marathon design sessions at his small kitchen table, drafting and redrafting ideas for a development that preserved the soul of Westbrook while satisfying Hammond Enterprises' commercial requirements. Nathan had initially approached the project with deep skepticism. Hammond's reputation for ruthless development was well established, and Victoria's sudden interest in preservation seemed suspiciously timed. But as they exchanged ideas, first via email, then in lengthy phone calls, his doubts had gradually given way to cautious optimism. There was genuine passion in Victoria's questions, real engagement with his vision for sustainable community spaces. She challenged his assumptions, pushed him to refine his concepts, but always with respect for his expertise. It was the kind of collaborative process he'd missed desperately since losing his firm. Still, Nathan remained wary. The power imbalance between them was impossible to ignore. Victoria Hammond could change her mind at any moment, discard his designs, and proceed with the original demolition plan. He had no illusions about his position as a small pawn in Hammond Enterprises' massive chess game. Yet here he was, tying a tie at 7:30 a.m., preparing to present his redesign to Hammond's executive team. Victoria had called yesterday with the news that the board had approved his concept, her voice vibrant with an excitement that had sent an unexpected thrill through him. All done, Emma declared as Nathan finally achieved a presentable nod. Now you look like a real architect again. Nathan swallowed hard, touched by his daughter's unwavering faith in him. Thanks, sweet pea. Now, are you sure you're okay with Mrs. Rodriguez watching you today? I could try to reschedule. Daddy, Emma interrupted with the exasperated patience of a child explaining something obvious to an adult. This is your big chance to save the library. And Mrs. Rodriguez said we could make cookies. Nathan laughed, kneeling to kiss his daughter's forehead. Well, I can't compete with cookies. Just be good. Okay, I should be back by dinner time. After dropping Emma with their elderly neighbor, Nathan caught the bus downtown, his portfolio clutched tightly under his arm. As the city passed by outside the window, he rehearsed his presentation mentally, anticipating questions and criticisms. Hammond Tower loomed over the surrounding buildings, a gleaming monolith of steel and glass that seemed to embody the company's dominating presence in Chicago's landscape. Nathan's stomach tightened as he entered the soaring lobby. Suddenly acutely aware of his second-hand suit and scuffed shoes, Mr. Collins, a security guard, approached. Ms. Hammond asked that you be escorted directly to the executive floor. The elevator ride to the 58th floor was swift and silent, giving Nathan no time to calm his racing heart. When the doors opened, Victoria was waiting, elegant in a tailored navy suit, her dark hair swept into a sleek low bun. Liam, she greeted him, her professional demeanor softened by a genuine smile. Thank you for coming, Ms. Hammond, he replied formally, conscious of the curious glances from staff members passing through the sleek reception area. Victoria, please, she corrected, leading him down a corridor lined with striking modern artwork. Especially today, we're partners in this project now. Partners. The word sent a complex wave of emotions through Nathan. Pride, hope, wariness, and something else he wasn't ready to examine. The conference room Victoria ushered him into offered a breathtaking panoramic view of Chicago, the lake a vast blue expanse on the horizon. A team of executives was already seated around the massive table, their expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. Everyone, this is Liam Collins, the architect behind our Westbrook Plaza redesign, Victoria announced, her tone leaving no room for questions about his presence. Liam, our executive team. Nathan set up his presentation with steady hands that belied his inner nervousness. 5 years ago, presentations to corporate clients had been routine. Now, it felt like his entire future hung on the next 30 minutes. But as soon as he began speaking, describing his vision for a development that honored Westbrook's history while creating new opportunities, the old confidence returned. This was his element, the intersection of design, functionality, and human experience. The nervousness faded, replaced by the familiar passion that had once marked him as a rising star in Chicago architecture. The executives' initial skepticism gradually gave way to engagement. They asked thoughtful questions, proposed refinements, and by the end, several were nodding with apparent approval. Throughout, Victoria remained at the head of the table, her attentive gaze moving between Nathan and her team, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Thank you, Mr. Collins, said an older executive as the presentation concluded. This is not what I expected, but quite impressive nonetheless. Indeed, added a younger woman whom Victoria had introduced as the marketing director. The sustainability aspects give us a strong narrative for press coverage. Hammond Enterprises leads urban preservation movement. I can work with that. Only one executive, a silver-haired man who had remained silent throughout, seemed unmoved. His cold gaze followed Nathan as Victoria escorted him from the conference room, promising to join him shortly for a more detailed discussion. That went well, Nathan said when they were alone in a smaller meeting room, allowing himself to relax slightly. Better than well, Victoria replied, her professional reserve falling away to reveal genuine enthusiasm. They loved it, Liam, even Jensen, and he hates everything. Nathan smiled, warmed by her excitement. And the silent gentleman who looked like he wanted to skewer me with his Mont Blanc pen? Victoria's expression clouded slightly. Richard Blackwood, my father's oldest friend and my most dedicated critic. Don't worry about him. He was outvoted. Before Nathan could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Tokyo is on the line. They're concerned about the schedule changes. Victoria nodded briskly. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. When Sarah had gone, she turned back to Nathan apologetically. I have to take this call, but I'd like to continue our discussion. Perhaps over dinner tonight? Nathan blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. Dinner. To discuss next steps, Victoria clarified quickly. There are details we should finalize before moving forward with the contractors. I have Emma, Nathan said automatically. My daughter, he added unnecessarily. Of course, Victoria said, a flicker of something like disappointment crossing her face. Another time. Then, Nathan hesitated, thinking of Emma's words that morning. This is your big chance, and Mrs. Rodriguez's standing offer to babysit any time. Actually, he heard himself saying, I could probably arrange something. For tonight. Victoria's smile returned, brightening her entire face in a way that made Nathan's heart beat a little faster. Wonderful. Shall we say 7 or... I know a small Italian place in River North, quiet enough for conversation. As Nathan left Hammond Tower 30 minutes later, portfolio under his arm and Victoria's dinner invitation replaying in his mind, he was seized by a sudden, irrational panic. What was he doing? This was Victoria Hammond, CEO of a billion-dollar company, a woman who moved in circles so far, removed from his own that they might as well occupy different planets. And he was having dinner with her to discuss next steps. The professional opportunity was undeniable. If Hammond Enterprises implemented his redesign, it would resurrect his career, provide financial stability for Emma, and potentially lead to more commissions. Everything he'd been struggling to regain for the past 3 years could be within reach. But as Nathan waited for the bus that would take him back to Westbrook, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping onto dangerous ground. Because beneath the professional considerations lurked something more personal. The undeniable pull he felt toward Victoria herself, the way her smile transformed her face, the passionate intelligence in her eyes when discussing design concepts, the gentle kindness she showed Emma. It was foolish, he told himself firmly. Victoria's interest was purely professional. She needed his architectural expertise to realize her new vision for Westbrook Plaza. Nothing more. Yet when he closed his eyes, it wasn't the conference room full of executives he saw, but Victoria kneeling to accept a yellow crayon from his daughter's outstretched hand. Castellini's was exactly as Victoria had described. A small, elegant restaurant tucked away on a side street, with soft lighting, well-spaced tables, and an atmosphere of discreet luxury. Nathan arrived precisely at 7 euros, having changed into a fresh shirt but keeping the same suit. His only option. Victoria was already seated at a corner table, her business attire replaced by a simple gray cashmere sweater that softened her professional image without diminishing her inherent elegance. She looked up as he approached, a smile of genuine pleasure lighting her face. You found it, she said as he slid into the chair across from her. This place is a bit of a hidden gem. Your directions were perfect, Nathan replied, taking in the understated opulence of the restaurant and trying not to think about the prices that were conspicuously absent from the menu. I took the liberty of ordering wine, Victoria said, gesturing to the bottle already open on the table. A Barolo that pairs well with most of their dishes. Nathan nodded in thanks as the waiter filled his glass. Acutely aware that the wine probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget, the realization intensified his sense of being out of place, a sensation that must have shone on his face. Is something wrong? Victoria asked, her brow furrowing slightly. Nathan hesitated, then decided on honesty. I haven't been to a restaurant like this in a very long time. Victoria's expression softened with understanding. Would you prefer somewhere else we could go to? No, Nathan interrupted quickly. This is fine. I just wanted to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Which elephant is that? Victoria asked, her head tilting slightly. Nathan gestured between them. This, you, me, Hammond Enterprises CEO, and struggling single dad having dinner at a restaurant where the tablecloths probably cost more than my suit. To his surprise, Victoria laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed her usually composed features. The tablecloths aren't that expensive, she said, her eyes twinkling. Though I can't speak to your suit. Her humor broke the tension, allowing Nathan to smile in return. It's my finest and only Goodwill special. Well, it suits you, Victoria said, her gaze warm as it swept over him. But I take your point. There's a certain incongruity to our situation. That's one way to put it, Nathan agreed, taking a sip of the wine, which was indeed excellent. I'm just trying to understand what I'm doing here. Victoria set down her glass, her expression turning serious. You're here because you're a talented architect whose vision for Westbrook Plaza aligned perfectly with what I was looking for. That's the professional answer. Nathan waited, sensing there was more. The personal answer, Victoria continued, her voice softer, is that I enjoy your company. And those opportunities are rare in my life. The simple honesty of her statement caught Nathan off guard. He had expected corporate platitudes, perhaps even subtle condescension. Instead, he glimpsed a vulnerability beneath the polished CEO exterior, a loneliness that resonated with his own. I enjoy your company too, he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. Though I'm still not entirely convinced this isn't some elaborate hallucination brought on by too many late nights drafting. Victoria smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. If it is, at least the wine is good. The arrival of their appetizers, delicate arancini for Victoria, carpaccio for Nathan, shifted the conversation to the Westbrook project. Victoria outlined the executive team's feedback, discussed timeline adjustments, and proposed several refinements to the sustainability features. Nathan found himself fully engaged, their professional dialogue flowing as smoothly as it had during their phone consultations. Victoria was both incisive and receptive, challenging his ideas while respecting his expertise. It was the kind of intellectual partnership he had missed desperately since the collapse of his firm. The library renovation is the element I'm most excited about, Victoria said as their main courses arrived. Preserving the historic facade while modernizing the interior services, it's a perfect metaphor for the entire development. It was always the heart of the design for me, Nathan admitted. When Emma and I first moved to Westbrook, the library was our sanctuary, free heat, free entertainment for a curious 7-year-old, and a quiet place where no one judged the down-on-his-luck single dad. Victoria's expression softened at the mention of Emma. She's remarkable. Your daughter. Children usually find me intimidating. Nathan smiled, pride warming his voice. Emma sees people differently. She always has. When she was little, Rebecca, my ex-wife, used to say that Emma could see straight through to people's souls. She saw that I was sad, Victoria said quietly, her gaze distant with memory. That first day in the library, no one had noticed that in, I can't remember how long. Were you? Nathan asked, momentarily forgetting professional boundaries. Sad. I mean, Victoria looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Yes, she said finally. I was. I still am. Sometimes, success doesn't preclude sadness. Liam? No, Nathan agreed softly. I suppose it doesn't. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the ambient sounds of the restaurant, quiet conversations, the clink of silverware against fine china, the gentle notes of classical music from hidden speakers. Tell me about your path to architecture, Victoria said eventually, her genuine interest evident in her attentive gaze. Nathan found himself sharing the story he rarely told anymore, how his grandfather, a master carpenter, had sparked his interest in buildings, how he'd worked construction jobs to pay for architecture school, how he'd met James Reeves and formed a partnership based on shared ideals about sustainable urban design. We were going to change the face of Chicago, he said, a hint of the old enthusiasm coloring his voice. Create spaces that served communities instead of just developers' profits. What happened? Victoria asked gently, though she likely knew the broad outlines from her research. Nathan sighed, the familiar ache of betrayal dulled, but not erased by time. The recession hit, projects were canceled. James panicked about meeting payroll and started creative accounting. By the time I discovered what he was doing, it was too late. You weren't charged, Victoria noted. It wasn't a question. She had clearly done her homework. No, the investigation cleared me of knowledge or involvement, but in architecture, reputation is everything. No major firm would touch me after that, and independent clients were scared away by the negative press. "And your wife?" Victoria asked, her tone careful. Nathan's laugh held no humor. "Apparently, James was more persuasive about our future prospects than I was. They left together, Rebecca and James. Last I heard, they were in Seattle." Victoria's expression registered genuine shock. "Your partner and your wife. The double betrayal," Nathan confirmed, draining his wineglass. "Not my finest hour." Victoria reached across the table, her hand covering his briefly. "I'm sorry, Liam. That's incredibly difficult." The simple touch, warm and comforting, sent an unexpected current through Nathan. He withdrew his hand casually, not wanting her to see how much the gesture affected him. "Emma was the saving grace," he said, steering the conversation to safer ground. "She was 4 when it happened, too young to fully understand, but old enough to keep me anchored when I might have fallen apart completely." Victoria smiled, refilling their wineglasses. "She's lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Nathan corrected. "Now, enough about my professional tragedy. What about you? Did you always plan to take over Hammond Enterprises?" A shadow crossed Victoria's face. "No, not at all. Actually," she hesitated, then shared her own story, how she'd studied art in Paris, beginning to make a name for herself in galleries, how her parents' sudden death in a plane crash 5 years ago had brought her back to Chicago and the family business she'd never intended to join. "My father always assumed my brother would take over," she explained. "James was the businessman, the natural heir. I was the artistic disappointment." "What happened to your brother?" Nathan asked, realizing he'd never heard mention of a Hammond son in the business press. "He died in the same crash," Victoria said quietly. "The entire family was traveling together. I was the only one who wasn't on the plane. I had an exhibition opening in Paris that weekend." "I'm so sorry," Nathan said, understanding now the depth of loss behind her carefully maintained composure. "That's an enormous burden to bear alone." Victoria nodded, her fingers tracing the stem of her wineglass. "The first year was a blur of grief and responsibility. The board wasn't convinced I could handle the company. Richard, my father's closest advisor, basically ran things while I learned the business. But you proved them wrong," Nathan observed. "Hammond Enterprises has grown significantly under your leadership." "Yes," Victoria agreed, a hint of pride in her voice. "But sometimes I wonder at what cost. The art, the creativity, the parts of myself that didn't fit into the Hammond legacy, they got packed away, like childhood toys you're supposed to outgrow." "Until a yellow crayon came along," Nathan said softly. Victoria's smile returned, warming her features. "Until a yellow crayon. Yes, and a little girl who saw what everyone else had stopped seeing." The conversation flowed easily after that, moving from professional aspirations to favorite books, from architectural influences to childhood memories. Nathan found himself laughing more than he had in years, drawn in by Victoria's quick wit and thoughtful insights. It was only when the waiter discreetly presented the check that Nathan realized 3 hours had passed. Victoria waved away his instinctive reach for his wallet. "Please," she said, "this was my invitation, and technically, a business dinner." Nathan hesitated, his pride warring with practicality. The meal would likely consume half his monthly discretionary budget. Still, the thought of Victoria paying reinforced the vast gulf between their financial realities. "Next time can be Dutch," Victoria offered, perceiving his discomfort. "Or you can cook for me. Emma mentioned you make a mean grilled cheese." "Slightly burnt grilled cheese," Nathan corrected with a self-deprecating smile. "It's my specialty." "I look forward to trying it sometime," Victoria said, her tone light but her eyes conveying a sincerity that made Nathan's heart beat faster. Outside the restaurant, Victoria's driver waited beside a sleek black car. The sudden reminder of their different worlds dampened the warm glow of the evening. "Can I offer you a ride home?" Victoria asked. Nathan shook his head. "Thanks, but I'm fine with the bus. I need to pick up Emma from the neighbors anyway." Victoria nodded, understanding in her eyes. Thank you for dinner. Liam, it was refreshing. Thank you for the opportunity, Nathan replied, meaning both the meal and the project. I'll send you the revised sketches by tomorrow afternoon. Liam, Victoria said, her hand lightly touching his arm. This wasn't just about the project. I hope you know that. Before he could respond, she had slipped into the waiting car, leaving Nathan standing on the sidewalk with the ghost of her touch still warm on his sleeve and a confusion of emotions he wasn't ready to name swirling in his chest. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as the Westbrook Plaza redesign moved from concept to implementation. Nathan found himself shuttling between his apartment, where he worked on detailed architectural plans, and Hammond Tower, where he participated in meetings with contractors, engineers, and Hammond's executive team. The position wasn't official. He remained a consultant rather than an employee, but it came with a generous stipend that allowed him to reduce his hours at the daily grind and focus on the project. For the first time in years, he felt like an architect again, his confidence rebuilding with each approved design element. Victoria was a constant presence throughout the process, her sharp intelligence and growing passion for the redesign development driving the project forward despite resistance from certain corners of Hammond Enterprises. Nathan watched with admiration as she deftly navigated corporate politics, standing firm on key elements of his design while strategically compromising on less essential details. Their professional relationship deepened into something that felt increasingly like friendship. Victoria began joining Nathan and Emma at the library, bringing architectural books she thought might interest him or art supplies for Emma. The little girl had taken to Victoria immediately, accepting her presence in their lives with the easy adaptability of childhood. Victoria knows all about famous paintings, Emma informed Nathan one evening as he tucked her into bed. She's teaching me how to mix colors to make new ones. That's wonderful, sweet pea, Nathan said, smoothing her wild curls away from her forehead. You like spending time with her, don't you? Emma nodded emphatically. She's not sad anymore when she's with us. Daddy? The yellow crayon worked. Nathan smiled at his daughter's simple assessment, though privately he wondered if it was accurate. Victoria did seem different when she was with them, more relaxed, more animated, the carefully maintained CEO persona falling away to reveal the woman beneath. But there were still moments when he caught a shadow in her eyes, a distant sadness that even Emma's exuberance couldn't fully dispel. One Saturday afternoon in late February, Victoria surprised them at the library with tickets to the Art Institute's new exhibition on modern architecture. Emma was initially disappointed. Museums are boring. Daddy, but Victoria had anticipated this reaction. This museum has a special children's area with art activities, she explained, kneeling to Emma's level. And afterward, we could visit the Cloudgate sculpture in Millennium Park. It looks like a giant silver bean that reflects the whole city. Emma's eyes widened with interest. A giant bean for real? Victoria nodded solemnly. For real. And you can see yourself all funny in it, like a magic mirror. That settled. The three of them spent a magical afternoon at the museum. Nathan lost himself in the architectural exhibits, engaging in animated discussions with Victoria about design philosophies and structural innovations. Emma, after enjoying the children's workshop where she created a colorful collage, surprised them both by becoming fascinated with the Impressionist gallery. They painted outside, she explained when Nathan asked what she liked about the artwork. And they didn't try to make things perfect. They just showed how things felt. Victoria smiled, clearly impressed by the child's insight. That's exactly right. Emma, they were more interested in capturing the feeling of a moment than in perfect details. Later, as Emma danced around the Cloudgate sculpture, laughing at her distorted reflection, Nathan found himself watching Victoria instead of his daughter. She stood slightly apart, her expression softened by a gentle smile as she observed Emma's antics. In her casual weekend attire, jeans, boots, and a soft blue sweater, she looked younger, more approachable, yet no less striking. Thank you for today, Nathan said quietly, moving to stand beside her. This was really nice. Victoria turned to him, her smile deepening. It was. Wasn't it? I can't remember the last time I visited a museum for pleasure, rather than a fundraising event. Well, Emma's artistic education thanks you, Nathan replied, nodding toward his daughter, who was now trying to touch her warped reflection on the sculpture's curved surface. And what about her father? Victoria asked, her tone light but her eyes searching his face. Did the architect enjoy himself too? Very much, Nathan admitted, holding her gaze. The company was as impressive as the exhibition. A faint blush colored Victoria's cheeks, a reaction so unexpected from the normally composed CEO that Nathan felt a surge of warmth in his chest. Before he could say more, Emma bounded over, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Can we get hot chocolate? She asked breathlessly. There's a cafe over there with whipped cream mountains on top. The moment broken, Nathan and Victoria exchanged amused glances before following Emma toward the cafe. As they sat drinking hot chocolate, with whipped cream mountains as promised, Nathan was struck by how natural it felt. This impromptu outing with Victoria, like a normal Saturday with family. The thought should have alarmed him. Victoria Hammond was not family. She was his client, his professional lifeline, perhaps becoming a friend. Nothing more. The gulf between their worlds remained vast and unbridgeable. Yet watching her help Emma wipe a whipped cream mustache from her upper lip, laughing at something his daughter had said, Nathan couldn't ignore the dangerous warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling he'd sworn never to indulge again after Rebecca's betrayal. As if sensing his thoughts, Victoria looked up, meeting his gaze across the small cafe table. Something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that was forming. Despite all the reasons it shouldn't, then Emma knocked over her hot chocolate. The moment shattered in a flurry of napkins and apologies, and Nathan pushed the dangerous thoughts away, focusing instead on the practical reality of cleaning up his daughter's spill. But later that night, after Emma was asleep, the memory of Victoria's smile in the winter sunlight returned, along with the uncomfortable recognition that his feelings for her were becoming increasingly difficult to categorize as merely professional or friendly. It was foolish, he told himself firmly. Victoria might enjoy their company, might even value his architectural input, but at the end of the day, she was Victoria Hammond, heir to a real estate empire. Accustomed to wealth and privilege Nathan could never provide, and he was a single father struggling to rebuild his life. With a daughter who had already experienced one parental abandonment, the risk was too great, the potential for heartbreak too severe. Better to maintain professional boundaries, to appreciate Victoria's friendship without allowing his imagination to construct possibilities that could never exist. With that resolution firmly in place, Nathan turned his attention back to the Westbrook Plaza plans, determined to focus on the opportunity that could realistically change his life, his professional life, for the better. The first signs of spring arrived in Chicago, with tentative green buds on bare branches and a softening of the bitter winter wind. On a bright March morning, Victoria stood at the edge of the Westbrook Plaza construction site, watching as workers carefully removed scaffolding from the renovated library facade. The century-old limestone gleamed in the sunlight, its classic details preserved, while modern windows now filled the once boarded openings. It's coming together beautifully, Liam said, coming to stand beside her. He wore a hard hat in the confident expression of an architect seeing his vision take physical form over the past 2 months. Victoria had watched him transform from the guarded, struggling single father she'd first met into this assured professional directing contractors and confidently presenting updates to Hammond's executive team. You were right about the copper accents, Victoria acknowledged, nodding toward the gleaming metalwork that edged the library's roof. They tie the historic building to the new construction perfectly. Liam smiled, the spring sunlight catching the flecks of gold in his green eyes. It'll develop a beautiful patina over time. That's the thing about good architecture. It should get better with age, not deteriorate. Like good relationships, Victoria thought but didn't say. Whatever was developing between her and Liam, this complex blend of professional respect, genuine friendship, and something deeper neither of them had named, had only strengthened over the weeks of collaboration. They had fallen into a comfortable routine, Weekly site visits together, working dinners at her penthouse or his small apartment, weekend outings with Emma that increasingly felt like precious respites from Victoria's corporate responsibilities. She had even joined them for Sunday breakfast twice, delighting in Liam's attempts to make fancy French toast to impress her. While Emma critiqued his technique with the solemnity of a cooking show judge, the board had noticed the change in her. Richard Blackwood, still stinging from his defeat over the Westbrook redesign, had taken to making thinly veiled comments about her personal interest in the project. Even Sarah, typically discreet, had raised an eyebrow when Victoria rescheduled a major investor meeting to attend Emma's school art show. Victoria didn't care, for the first time since her parents' death. She was experiencing genuine happiness, moments of connection and warmth that made the cold, efficient world of Hammond Enterprises seem increasingly hollow. Ms. Hammond, the site foreman approached, clipboard in hand. We've got the community council members arriving in 10 minutes for the tour. Victoria nodded, mentally shifting into her professional mode. Today marked an important milestone, the first official tour for the Westbrook Neighborhood Association, whose initial opposition to Hammond's development had transformed into cautious support thanks to Liam's inclusive redesign. Are you ready for this? She asked Liam as they walked toward the site entrance, where folding chairs and refreshments had been arranged for the presentation. They were your harshest critics at the beginning. Liam adjusted his hard hat, a flicker of nervousness crossing his face. These are my neighbors, Victoria, people who wave to Emma and me on our way to the library every day. Their approval matters more than any corporate clients. Victoria squeezed his arm gently, understanding his anxiety. They'll love it, she assured him. How could they not? The tour proceeded better than either of them could have hoped. The community representatives, a diverse group of longtime Westbrook residents, moved from skepticism to surprise to genuine enthusiasm as Liam led them through the site, explaining how their input had shaped key elements of the design. So the coffee shop stays? Asked Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who had been particularly vocal in the early protests. In the same location, not only stays, but expands, Liam confirmed, pointing to the architectural renderings displayed on easels. The daily grind will have a larger seating area and a new outdoor patio connecting to the library's community garden. And the rent, pressed Mr. Gonzalez, owner of the neighborhood hardware store. What happens after the initial period? Victoria stepped forward, taking this question herself. Hammond Enterprises has committed to capping rent increases at 3% annually for all existing Westbrook businesses that choose to remain in the development. That commitment is written into the master plan approved by the City Council. Murmurs of approval rippled through the group. Victoria caught Liam's eye, sharing a moment of quiet triumph. This, the preservation of a neighborhood's character alongside thoughtful modernization, was exactly what they had envisioned together. As the tour concluded and the community members dispersed, many stopping to shake Liam's hand or offer congratulations, Victoria felt a surge of pride unlike anything she'd experienced in her corporate career. Hammond Enterprises had built dozens of developments under her leadership, each more profitable than the last, but none had given her this sense of meaningful accomplishment. That went well, Liam said, joining her after the last visitors had departed. His smile was wide, relief and satisfaction evident in his relaxed posture. It went perfectly, Victoria corrected, impulsively reaching for his hand and squeezing it. You were brilliant. Liam, they trust you. Liam's hand tightened around hers briefly before releasing it, a moment of connection that sent warmth spreading through Victoria's chest. They trust us, he amended. This is your project too, Victoria. You fought for it when it would have been easier to stick with the original plan. Best decision I ever made, she said softly, her gaze holding his. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Liam cleared his throat, glancing at his watch. I should pick up Emma from school. We're celebrating with ice cream, her idea of the appropriate reward for any good news. A wise philosophy, Victoria said, smiling even as she felt a pang of disappointment at the interruption. Give her my congratulations, too. Her father's a hero today. Liam's expression softened. Would you like to join us for the ice cream celebration? Victoria thought of the board meeting scheduled for late afternoon, the quarterly reports waiting for her review, the conference call with European investors that Sarah had already rescheduled twice. I'd love to, she said, making her decision. The Hammond Empire can survive without me for a few more hours. The smile that lit Liam's face was worth every rearranged meeting. Coditine. Emma's excited squeal when she spotted Victoria waiting beside her father outside the school pierced the air. Drawing curious glances from other parents, she launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around Victoria's waist in an enthusiastic hug that nearly knocked the CEO off her Louboutin heels. You came, Daddy said you might be too busy with important business stuff. Victoria returned the hug, still somewhat amazed by the child's unrestrained affection. No one in her adult life hugged her like this, with complete, uncomplicated joy. I wouldn't miss an ice cream celebration, she replied, smoothing a hand over Emma's wild curls. Especially not when your dad has such good news to share. As they walked to the ice cream parlor 3 blocks from the school, Emma between them, holding both their hands and occasionally swinging herself forward, Victoria was struck by how natural this felt. How right. The corporate world where she spent most of her hours suddenly seemed distant and artificial compared to this simple moment of shared happiness. Victoria, what's your favorite ice cream? Emma asked as they approached the shop, its cheerful blue awning bright against the brick building. Mine's chocolate chip cookie dough with extra cookie dough chunks. That sounds delicious, Victoria said, pretending to consider seriously. But I think I'm partial to butter pecan. Emma's nose wrinkled in distaste. That's an old person flavor. Emma, Liam admonished, though his lips twitched with suppressed laughter. That's not polite, Victoria laughed, unoffended. It's all right. My father loved butter pecan too. He always said you have to be mature enough to appreciate the subtle flavors. See, Emma said triumphantly to her father. Old person flavor. Inside the ice cream shop, they found a small table by the window after ordering their selections. Cookie dough for Emma, butter pecan for Victoria, and coffee chocolate chunk for Liam, as Emma eagerly dug into her overflowing cup. Liam quietly shared the details of the community tour, his face animated with pride and relief. The library was the turning point, he explained, gesturing with his plastic spoon. When they saw that we'd preserved not just the facade, but the reading room with its original woodwork and stained glass, I could feel the mood shift completely. It was your vision, Liam, Victoria said. Meaning it. I just provided the resources. Liam shook his head. Don't diminish your role. Any other developer would have bulldozed the entire block without a second thought. You chose a different path. Because of a yellow crayon, Emma interjected, looking up from her ice cream with a chocolate-smeared smile. And because Daddy's the best architect in Chicago, Liam's cheeks colored slightly at his daughter's unwavering faith. Well, I don't know about that, Munchkin, but today was definitely a good day for Team Collins. Team Collins Hammond, Emma corrected, with the definitive authority only a 7-year-old could muster. Victoria's on our team now. Victoria felt a sudden tightness in her throat at the casual inclusion. Team Collins Hammond. Such a simple statement, yet it carried implications that both thrilled and terrified her. Was that what they were becoming, a team, a unit? Something like family. Speaking of teams, Liam said, clearly trying to change the subject. Emma has her first soccer game this Saturday. Nothing serious, just the community league for first and second graders. I'm going to be a forward, Emma announced proudly. That means I get to score goals. That sounds exciting, Victoria said, grateful for the conversational shift. I'm sure you'll be wonderful. Emma's expression turned suddenly earnest, her blue eyes wide and hopeful. Will you come watch me? Please, Daddy says it's important to have people cheering for you. Victoria hesitated, glancing at Liam, who looked equally caught off guard by his daughter's invitation. I wouldn't want to intrude on your special time with your dad, she said carefully. It's not intruding. Emma insisted. It's being on the team. Our team, Liam cleared his throat. Emma, Victoria's very busy. She runs a huge company. Remember, she can't just, I'd love to come, Victoria interrupted, making the decision in that moment. Board meetings and investor calls could wait. This, the hope in Emma's eyes, the surprised pleasure on Liam's face, this mattered more. What time is the game? As Emma launched into a detailed explanation of her soccer uniform and the rules she'd learned in practice, Victoria caught Liam watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, gratitude mixed with something deeper, more complex. When their eyes met over Emma's animated gestures, she felt the now familiar flutter in her chest, the sense of connection that had been growing stronger with each shared moment. Later, as they walked Emma back to her school for her afternoon classes, the little girl skipping ahead of them, Liam turned to Victoria. "You don't have to come to the soccer game," he said quietly. "I know you were just being kind to Emma." Victoria shook her head. "I want to come. Liam, truly. Even though it's a bunch of 7-year-olds running in approximately the same direction as a soccer ball." She laughed at his description. "Even then, especially then." Liam studied her face, his green eyes serious despite his light tone. "You've become important to her. You know, to Emma." Victoria felt her heart skip. "She's become important to me too." She admitted it then, taking a breath. She added, "You both have." The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Liam's expression softened, vulnerability replacing caution in his gaze. "Victoria. Daddy Victoria. Hurry up," Emma called from the school entrance. Breaking the moment, "The bell's gonna ring," with a small, rueful smile. Liam stepped back. "To be continued," he said softly. Before turning to join his daughter, Victoria watched them go, Emma's chestnut curls bouncing as she pulled her father toward the building, her small hand trustingly enclosed in his larger one. The sight filled Victoria with a longing so acute it was almost painful, a yearning for connection, for belonging, for the kind of simple, profound love that flowed between father and daughter. As she turned to walk back to where her driver waited, Victoria's phone buzzed. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, undoubtedly calling about the board meeting she was now going to be late for. Victoria hesitated, then silenced the ringer and slipped the phone back into her purse. For once, Hammond Enterprises could wait. Saturday dawned clear and mild. Perfect weather for Emma's first soccer game. Nathan helped his daughter into her bright blue uniform, suppressing a smile at her intense concentration as she tied her cleats exactly as her coach had demonstrated. "How do I look, Daddy?" she asked, striking a pose with her hands on her hips. "Like the next Megan Rapinoe," Nathan assured her, straightening the collar of her jersey. "Ready to conquer the soccer world?" Emma beamed, her excitement palpable. Then her expression turned anxious. "Do you think Victoria will remember to come?" "She said she would," Nathan replied, keeping his tone neutral despite his own uncertainty. Victoria had texted yesterday confirming her attendance, but he knew how quickly corporate emergencies could arise. He didn't want Emma disappointed, but he also didn't want to doubt Victoria, who had proven remarkably reliable in her promises to his daughter. "She'll be there," Emma said with absolute confidence, patting her jersey where a yellow crayon was tucked into the small pocket, her good luck charm. "I saw it in my dream." Nathan smiled at his daughter's unwavering faith in both her dreams and in Victoria. Emma's claims of prophetic dreams had always been a sweet quirk of her imaginative personality. But lately, Nathan had found himself wondering. She had dreamed of Victoria before they met her. She had dreamed of the library being saved when demolition seemed inevitable. Coincidences, surely, but strangely specific ones. The community park was bustling with activity when they arrived. Small children in various colored jerseys darting about. Parents setting up folding chairs along the sidelines. Coaches organizing equipment with varying degrees of competence. Emma immediately spotted her teammates and rushed to join them, waving excitedly to her friend Zoe. Nathan found a spot on the sideline, Setting up the camping chair he'd brought and scanning the growing crowd of parents for a familiar face, he told himself he wasn't looking for Victoria, but the disappointment he felt when he didn't see her was impossible to ignore. "Is this seat taken?" a voice asked just as the teams were lining up for the opening whistle. Nathan looked up to find Victoria standing beside him, gesturing to the empty space next to his chair. She looked completely different from her corporate persona, dressed in jeans, a casual blue sweater that matched Emma's uniform, and white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and large sunglasses shielded her eyes from the spring sunshine. "You made it," he said, unable to keep the pleasure from his voice as he moved his bag to make room for her. "I promised," Victoria replied simply, unfolding a chair she'd brought and settling beside him. "Did I miss anything, or just the pregame jitters?" "Emma's been bouncing off the walls since dawn," Victoria smiled, removing her sunglasses and scanning the field until she spotted Emma, who was jumping up and down in her position, waving frantically when she noticed Victoria on the sideline. Victoria waved back, her smile widening at the child's enthusiasm. "Thank you for coming," Nathan said quietly as the referee's whistle started the game. "It means a lot to her." "And to you?" Victoria asked, her gaze still on the field where Emma was now chasing after the ball with single-minded determination. Nathan turned to look at her profile, struck again by how different she appeared outside her corporate environment. Softer, more approachable, yet no less captivating. "Yes," he admitted. "To me, too." Victoria glanced at him, their eyes meeting briefly before both turned back to watch Emma's efforts on the field. The game itself was exactly as Nathan had described, a chaotic herd of small children following the ball with varying degrees of skill and attention. Emma, to her credit, seemed more focused than most, though her enthusiasm occasionally outpaced her coordination. When she managed to kick the ball in approximately the right direction, Victoria cheered as loudly as any parent, her corporate reserve completely abandoned. Nathan found himself watching her almost as much as the game, captivated by this unguarded version of Victoria Hammond. "Go, Emma!" Victoria shouted when Emma briefly gained control of the ball, her hands cupped around her mouth to amplify the encouragement. When Emma promptly tripped over her own feet, Victoria winced sympathetically. "She's right back up," she said to Nathan. "That's resilience. She gets that from her mother." Nathan replied without thinking. Rebecca was stubborn as hell. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of his ex-wife, a topic he usually avoided. "And what does she get from you?" Nathan considered the question, watching as Emma determinedly repositioned herself on the field. "The creativity. Maybe the ability to see possibilities where others don't. And the heart," Victoria added softly. "She definitely gets that from you." Before Nathan could respond to the unexpected compliment, the crowd erupted in cheers, somehow, in the midst of the childish chaos. Emma's team had scored a goal. It wasn't Emma who had scored, but she was jumping up and down with such unbridled joy that it hardly mattered. At halftime, Emma raced over to them, her face flushed with exertion and excitement. "Did you see we're winning?" she exclaimed, gulping water from the bottle Nathan handed her. "We saw," Victoria confirmed, her smile warm. "You're playing wonderfully. Emma." Emma beamed at the praise. "I'm going to score a goal in the second half," she declared with absolute certainty. "I saw it in my dream last night." Victoria's eyes met Nathan's over Emma's head, a silent question in them. He shrugged slightly, used to his daughter's confident predictions. "Well, we'll be cheering for you either way," he said, ruffling Emma's sweaty curls. "Team Collins Hammond," Emma said, extending her small hand palm down between them, clearly expecting them to stack their hands on top in a team gesture. After a moment's hesitation, both adults complied, their hands forming a tower with Emma's at the bottom. "Team Collins Hammond," they echoed, and Nathan couldn't help noticing how right it felt, Victoria's slender hand resting lightly on top of his, Emma's beaming face completing the circle of connection. The second half of the game was as chaotic as the first, but miraculously, with about 5 minutes remaining. Emma found herself in the right place at the right time. A deflected ball rolled directly to her feet with no defenders nearby and only the goalkeeper between her and glory. Nathan and Victoria both leapt to their feet as Emma hesitated for a crucial second, clearly stunned by her good fortune. Then, with a determination that scrunched her entire face, she kicked the ball as hard as her small leg could manage. The ball wobbled uncertainly toward the goal, slow enough that Nathan held his breath, certain the opposing goalkeeper would stop it easily. But the other child, perhaps as surprised as Emma by the sudden opportunity, dove in the wrong direction, and the ball rolled gently into the net. The sideline erupted with cheers, but none louder than Victoria's. "She did it!" she exclaimed, grabbing Nathan's arm in her excitement. "Emma scored on the field!" Emma stood frozen in disbelief for a moment before launching into a celebration dance that involved a lot of jumping and arm waving. Her teammates swarmed her, and even from the sideline, Nathan could see his daughter's face shining with pure joy. "She really did see it in her dream," Victoria said wonderingly as they watched the celebration. "Coincidence," Nathan replied automatically. Though a small part of him wondered, Victoria's gaze was thoughtful. "Maybe, or maybe Emma just sees things more clearly than the rest of us." When the final whistle blew, Emma's team victorious by 2-1, she raced directly to them, launching herself into a group hug that included both Nathan and Victoria without distinction. Nathan felt Victoria stiffen momentarily in surprise before relaxing into the embrace, her arm naturally finding its way around his waist as they both hugged Emma between them. "I told you I'd score," Emma crowed, her face alight with triumph. "The yellow crayon brought good luck." "You brought the good luck, sweetheart," Victoria said, kneeling to be at eye level with Emma. "That was all you—" Emma shook her head solemnly. "It was all of us. Team Collins Hammond." Nathan watched as Victoria's expression softened, emotion replacing her usual composure. "Team Collins Hammond," she agreed softly, and Nathan heard in her voice the same wonder he felt. That somehow, against all odds, they had become something that resembled a family. The thought should have terrified him, instead. As they walked together toward the parking lot, Emma skipping ahead with her prized soccer ball, Nathan felt a sense of rightness that had been absent from his life for too long. "Ice cream to celebrate," he suggested, looking at Victoria. "It's tradition after sporting events, according to Emma's extensive research." Victoria smiled, the spring sunlight catching the auburn highlights in her dark hair. "I wouldn't dare argue with such thoroughly established tradition." As they followed Emma toward the ice cream shop, Victoria's hand brushed against Nathan's, perhaps accidentally, perhaps not. Without overthinking, he captured it in his own, their fingers intertwining naturally. Victoria looked at him, surprise and something warmer flickering in her eyes. Nathan half expected her to pull away, to maintain the careful boundaries they had established. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of the step they were taking. It was a small gesture, commonplace for most couples, but for Nathan and Victoria, with all the complications of their different worlds, their pasts, their fears, it represented a crossing of a threshold neither had been sure they would reach. Team Collins Hammond indeed, Nathan thought, watching Emma's exuberant skipping ahead of them. Against all odds, they were becoming something new, something unexpected, something that felt remarkably like hope. The boardroom at Hammond Enterprises fell silent as Victoria concluded her presentation, the quarterly results displayed on the screen behind her exceeding projections in nearly every category. She remained standing at the head of the table, cool and composed despite the tensions simmering beneath the surface. "As you can see," she said, gesturing to the final slide, "the Westbrook Plaza redesign, despite its higher initial investment, is already generating significant positive returns. Pre-leasing for both the commercial and residential components is at 87%, well above our target at this stage." Janet Chen nodded approvingly. "The press coverage has been exceptional. Hammond leads urban preservation movement. That headline in Architectural Digest was worth millions in positive PR." "Indeed," Victoria agreed, allowing herself a small smile. "Our marketing team estimates the earned media value at approximately $12 million to date." Most of the board members looked pleased with this information, making notes or nodding in satisfaction. Only Richard Blackwood remained stone-faced, his expression growing darker as Victoria detailed the project's success. This proves what I've been saying from the beginning, Victoria concluded. Ethical development isn't just morally right, it's good business. I propose we apply the Westbrook model to our upcoming Monroe Street project, preserving the historic theater while... Before we move on to new projects, Richard interrupted, his voice cutting through the room. There's another matter we need to discuss. He slid a manila folder across the table toward Victoria. Your personal involvement with the Westbrook architect. Victoria's heart stuttered, but her expression remained impassive as she opened the folder. Inside were photographs. Victoria and Liam at the soccer game, holding hands, the three of them at an ice cream shop. Laughing together, Victoria entering Liam's apartment building late one evening. You've had me followed, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Richard didn't flinch. The board has a responsibility to protect Hammond Enterprises from potential conflicts of interest. Your relationship with Collins raises serious questions about your judgment. Victoria looked around the table, noting the varying expressions of her fellow board members. Discomfort, curiosity, concern. Only Janet seemed genuinely sympathetic, offering a small shrug of apology. My personal life is not board business, Victoria stated firmly, closing the folder. It becomes board business when you funnel millions of company resources into projects designed by your companion, Richard countered. When you redirect our entire development strategy based on the influence of a man who, let's not forget, was partner in a firm that collapsed amid fraud allegations, Victoria felt heat rising in her cheeks, anger threatening to breach her professional composure. Liam Collins was cleared of all wrongdoing in that matter, as you well know, and the Westbrook redesign was approved by this very board, including you. Richard, the success of the project speaks for itself. The question, Richard pressed, leaning forward, is whether your judgment has been compromised by emotional entanglement. Hammond Enterprises has always operated on rational business principles, not sentiment. Is that what my father told you? Victoria asked, a sudden clarity cutting through her anger. That business and sentiment don't mix, because my mother had a different view, as Walter might recall. Walter Freeman, who had been quietly observing the exchange, straightened in his chair. Margaret believed that ethical considerations enhanced business outcomes rather than hindering them, he confirmed, his age-roughened voice carrying surprising authority. A perspective that seems validated by the Westbrook results. Richard's expression hardened. Times have changed since Margaret's day. The market is more competitive, the margins tighter. We can't afford idealistic experiments based on a CEO's personal feelings. Is that what this is really about? Richard, Victoria asked, her patience finally snapping. My gender, my age, or is it simply that I'm making decisions my father wouldn't have made? A tense silence fell over the room. Victoria rarely referenced her father in board meetings, understanding the complex emotions his memory evoked among the long-serving members. Your father, Richard said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger, built this company from nothing through discipline and clear thinking. He never would have risked Hammond's reputation on a personal infatuation, Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and without humor. My father risked far more than the company's reputation. Richard, or have you forgotten the Jensen property scandal, the lawsuits from the displaced Riverdale residents, the environmental violations that cost us millions in settlements? Richard blanched, clearly not expecting Victoria to air such dirty laundry in front of the full board. Many of the newer members looked surprised. These episodes had been carefully managed in Hammond's official history. The difference, Victoria continued, her voice steadier now, is that my father's risks served only profit. While mine served both profit and principle, the quarterly results speak for themselves. Hammond Enterprises is thriving under my leadership, with or without your approval of my personal life. She gathered the photographs, sliding them back into the folder and returning it to Richard. Now, if we can return to actual business matters, I'd like to discuss the Monroe Street project. For a tense moment, it seemed Richard might continue his attack. Then Janet Chen deliberately shifted the conversation, asking a specific question about the theater preservation costs. The moment passed, though Victoria could feel Richard's cold anger radiating from his end of the table. When the meeting concluded an hour later, Victoria remained seated as the other members filed out, some offering encouraging nods or sympathetic glances. Richard was the last to leave, pausing at the door. "This isn't over, Victoria," he said quietly. "Your father trusted me to protect his legacy. I won't stand by while you dismantle it for a failed architect and his daughter." The mention of Emma sent a chill through Victoria. "Threaten me all you want, Richard," she replied, her voice low and controlled. "But leave Liam and Emma out of this. They're not pawns in your corporate game." Richard's smile held no warmth. "Everything is part of the game. Victoria, your father understood that. Pity you never learned the lesson." After he left, Victoria sat alone in the boardroom, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. She had known this confrontation was coming, had prepared for it. But the reality was still jarring. Richard's opposition wasn't just professional, it was personal. A fundamental rejection of the changes she was trying to make at Hammond Enterprises. And now he had dragged Liam and Emma into the conflict. The thought of them being watched, photographed, their private moments invaded for corporate ammunition made Victoria's stomach clench with both rage and fear. She should end it now, she thought desperately. Step back from Liam and Emma before they became further entangled in Hammond politics. It would be the sensible choice, the safe choice for all of them. But as Victoria gathered her papers, her gaze fell on a small yellow crayon she'd taken to carrying in her purse, Emma's original gift. Now worn down to a stub, the sight of it centered her, reminding her of the simple wisdom that had started this journey. Sometimes the right path wasn't the easy one. Victoria reached for her phone, dialing Liam's number. They needed to talk. About Richard, about the photographs, about the choice they now faced. Because it was a choice they should make together, as the team Emma so confidently proclaimed them to be. Gertillo. Nathan was sketching at his kitchen table when Victoria's call came through. Emma was at a friend's house for dinner, giving him a rare evening of solitude to work on a new concept for the Monroe Street Theater Victoria had mentioned might be Hammond's next preservation project. "Hey," he answered, a smile automatically forming at the sound of her voice, but it quickly faded as she explained the situation. Richard's ambush, the surveillance photos, the thinly veiled threats. "I'm coming over," he said immediately, already reaching for his jacket. "We should discuss this in person." 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other at Nathan's small kitchen table, the manila folder with its intrusive photographs between them. Victoria looked exhausted, the professional armor she wore so effectively at Hammond Tower stripped away to reveal genuine worry. "I'm so sorry, Liam," she said, her voice uncharacteristically fragile. "I never thought he'd go this far." Nathan studied the photographs, his initial anger giving way to a deeper concern. "Has he threatened you directly beyond the board meeting?" Victoria shook her head. "Not in so many words, but Richard has been my father's right hand for 30 years. He knows where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking, and he's not above using that knowledge to maintain control. Control of Hammond Enterprises or control of you?" "Both," Victoria admitted, rubbing her temples. "In his mind, they're the same thing. I'm just a caretaker of my father's legacy until—" "Until what?" Nathan pressed gently when she trailed off. Victoria's laugh held no humor. "Until I produce a male heir, I suppose, or marry someone Richard deems suitable to run the company. Someone like Thomas Ellsworth, the developer's son he's been trying to set me up with for years." Nathan felt an irrational surge of jealousy at the mention of this unknown rival, then immediate self-reproach at his own presumption. He had no claim on Victoria Hammond, no right to feel possessive. "What do you want to do?" he asked, forcing himself to focus on the practical issue at hand. Victoria's gaze met his directly. "The sensible thing would be to create some distance, professionally and personally, at least until Westbrook is completed And your contractual relationship with Hammond is concluded. Nathan nodded slowly, the practical architect in him recognizing the logic while his heart rebelled against it. That would be the sensible approach, he agreed, his tone carefully neutral. But, Victoria continued, her voice softening, I find I don't want to be sensible anymore. Liam, not about this. Not about us. The simple admission sent a wave of warmth through Nathan. Us, he echoed, needing to hear her define what had been growing between them these past months. Victoria reached across the table, her fingers finding his. I care about you, Liam, and Emma, more than I thought possible. The time we spend together, it's the only time I feel truly myself. Not just Hammond's CEO or my father's daughter. Nathan turned his hand to capture hers, their fingers intertwining. I care about you too, he said quietly, more than is probably wise, given our circumstances. Our circumstances, Victoria repeated with a small, sad smile. The billionaire CEO and the struggling single dad. It sounds like the plot of a terrible romance novel. Definitely not my usual reading material, Nathan agreed, a hint of humor lightening the moment. Then, more seriously, what Richard did, having us followed, those photographs, that crosses a line. Victoria, I can handle criticism of my professional work, but Emma's privacy, he trailed off, protective anger surging again at the thought of his daughter being drawn into corporate warfare. I know, Victoria said, her grip on his hand tightening. That's what bothers me most. I'm used to boardroom battles, but involving a child is unconscionable. If he ever tried to use Emma against us, I would never forgive him. The fierceness in her voice, the instinctive protection of Emma, touched Nathan deeply. Whatever doubts he might have harbored about Victoria's feelings for his daughter vanished in that moment. So where does that leave us? He asked. I won't have Emma exposed to this kind of ugliness, but I also don't want to. He hesitated, searching for the right words. Don't want to give up what we've started. Victoria finished for him, her dark eyes holding his. Neither do I. They sat in silence for a moment, still holding hands across the table, the weight of their complicated situation hanging between them. Then Victoria straightened, a familiar determination entering her expression. Richard thinks he can intimidate me into conforming to his vision of Hammond Enterprises, she said, her voice stronger now. He believes I'll sacrifice my personal happiness for the company, just as my father did. But he's wrong. What are you saying? Nathan asked, both hopeful and cautious. I'm saying we don't hide, Victoria declared. We don't pretend there's nothing between us. We continue exactly as we have been, professionally collaborative on Westbrook. Personally, she paused, a hint of vulnerability returning. Whatever we're becoming, and Richard, Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Let him do his worst. Hammond Enterprises is legally mine. My parents left controlling interest to me. Not the board. Richard has influence, but not ultimate authority. And every financial indicator shows that my leadership has been successful. Regardless of his opinion of my personal choices, Nathan considered her words, impressed by her courage but still concerned. It won't be easy, he warned. Men like Richard don't give up power willingly. No, Victoria agreed. But some things are worth fighting for. Her gaze softened as it held his. Some people are worth fighting for. The simple sincerity of her statement moved Nathan deeply. 5 years ago, he had watched his marriage crumble, his wife choosing the easier path away from scandal and struggle. Now Victoria, with infinitely more to lose, was choosing to stand beside him despite the opposition they faced. I'm not sure I'm worth the trouble, he said quietly, old insecurities rising to the surface. Hammond Enterprises is your legacy. Victoria, your parents' life work. Hammond is a company, Victoria replied firmly. A successful one. Yes, but still just a business. What you and Emma have shown me these past months, connection, creativity, simple joy, that's legacy worth protecting too. Nathan stood, unable to remain still with the emotions surging through him. He moved around the table, drawing Victoria to her feet and into his arms. She came willingly, her body fitting against his as if designed to be there. "Whatever happens with Richard, with Hammond, with anything," he said softly, looking down into her upturned face, "know that Emma and I are in your corner. Team Collins Hammond. All the way." Victoria's smile was radiant, transforming her face from its usual elegant beauty to something more vibrant, more real. "Team Collins Hammond," she echoed, her arms sliding around his neck. When their lips finally met, it felt like the most natural progression imaginable. Not a first kiss between unlikely partners, but a continuation of the connection that had been building since a yellow crayon changed both their lives. Nathan pulled her closer, feeling Victoria's response in the way she pressed against him, her hands tangling in his hair. They broke apart only when the need for breath became imperative, both slightly dazed by the intensity of the moment. Victoria's usual composure was delightfully rumpled, her lipstick smudged, her eyes wide and bright with emotion. "Well," she said, a breathy quality to her voice Nathan had never heard before. "That certainly clarifies a few things." Nathan laughed, keeping his arms around her waist. "I've wanted to do that since the community tour," he admitted. "Maybe even since the ice cream shop with Emma. The art museum for me," Victoria confessed, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "When you were explaining Gary's design philosophy to Emma using her ice cream spoon as a model, you were so patient, so engaged with her questions. I think that's when I knew this was more than friendship or professional respect." The intimacy of the moment, standing in his modest kitchen, sharing these confessions, struck Nathan as both surreal and perfectly right. Victoria Hammond, who could have had anyone, was choosing him, complications and all. The sound of a key in the front door broke them apart. Though not completely, Victoria's hand found his, their fingers intertwining as Emma burst into the apartment, chattering excitedly about her dinner at Zoe's house. She stopped short when she saw them standing together, her perceptive gaze taking in their linked hands and slightly flushed faces. A slow, knowing smile spread across her features. "Finally," she declared with the exasperation of someone who had been waiting forever for obvious events to unfold. "I told you the yellow crayon would work. Daddy, I saw it in my dream." Nathan and Victoria exchanged glances, equal parts amusement and amazement at Emma's matter-of-fact acceptance. "Did you now?" Nathan asked, pulling his daughter into a one-armed hug while keeping hold of Victoria's hand. Emma nodded solemnly. "Yep, I saw us all together in the library. The new one you're building. Victoria was showing me how to paint stars on the ceiling, and you were designing a special reading nook just for me." She looked up at them, her expression suddenly anxious. "That's still going to happen?" "Right." Victoria knelt to Emma's level, her free hand gently tucking a wild curl behind the child's ear. "If that's what you saw in your dream, Emma, then I believe it will happen. Your dreams have been right before." The simple affirmation, taking Emma's prophetic claims seriously rather than dismissing them as childish fantasy, earned Victoria a fierce hug from the little girl over Emma's head. Her eyes met Nathan's, conveying without words the depth of her commitment to both of them. As Nathan watched the two most important people in his world embrace, he felt a sense of certainty unlike anything he'd experienced since before his firm's collapse. Whatever challenges Richard Blackwood and Hammond Enterprises might throw at them, whatever complications their different worlds might create, they would face them together. Team Collins Hammond, a family forged not by blood or convention, but by choice, by connection, and by the simple transformative power of a child's yellow crayon.